people need access to nature where they live, work, and play, right where they step out of their house in the morning. I see boxes swifts, obviously crows, violet green swallows, American goldfinches, all flying around over Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. I've seen over 110 species of birds here. We're right in the heart of the city of Portland. Imagine that, 110 different kinds of birds that you can see right here in the Sellwood neighborhood. It's pretty phenomenal. Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, which by the way is the first formal, officially designated urban wildlife refuge in the city of Portland system. It's a refuge both for the critters and for people.
For me and for us, it's a really interesting microcosm of the city that we live in. That on one side is the bottom and the refuge and the history, and on the other is the river and the cyclists and the Springwater Corridor. And so, I mean, we come mostly for fun and recreation.
If we don't create cities that people love to live in, that absolutely want to live in, that are livable and lovable, there will continue to be this notion that people want their acre, their 2 acres or 5 acres out in the rural hinterlands and then driving back into the city for work. The people will feel the need to, quote, escape from the city. In order to provide a healthy environment for people, we've got to do more to protect nature where people live.
Big deer. Yeah.
Deer.
Deer. We saw a deer our first time around today, so we're looking for the deer here coming back again.
Great.
What else did we see, Shane?
River.
We saw the river.
Yeah.
And did we see ducks?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Shane. Oh, my name is Sam Erickson. It's a lovely place to be.
In 1980, when I started, I was told no place for nature in the city. It was viewed as very odd to be spending time, money, and resources to protect nature in the city. That attitude has changed dramatically over the last 30 years, I'm pleased to say.
Welcome to the Nature Here TV show. I'm Michelle Shapiro. I'll be your host for today's segment, Wildlife for City Folks. Yes, there's wildlife here in southeast Portland on the Willamette River at Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. Our guest today is Mike Houck. Hi Mike, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and then your work here at the refuge?
Sure. I got started actually at Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge as a graduate student at Portland State University, literally 44 years ago. I'd been recruited by a fellow who turned out to be a very close friend from Audubon Society of Portland, which I actually started working for in 1980 as urban naturalist. I'm now director of the Urban Greenspaces Institute, so I have my feet in both organizations, Audubon Society of Portland and the Urban Greenspaces Institute. And I've spent the last 30 years of my life working to ensure that we're integrating nature into the city, because I feel very strongly that people should have access to nature from the moment they walk outside their front door.
What is it that's so special to you about being in nature? Like, how do you feel when you walk into a natural area?
What really inspires me about urban nature is that you can see a bald eagle or a peregrine falcon or just amazing displays of waterfowl in areas such as Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, literally where people are living. So I expect to see a peregrine falcon or a prairie falcon in eastern Oregon. In the city, when you see a great blue heron flying into its nest on Ross Island with South Waterfront apartments behind it, to me that heightens the magic of having access and being able to see nature where people live.
Because it seems like the juxtaposition of a hard city and walking into a wildlife area seems incongruous. So do you think it really works?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the best examples I can give of that juxtaposition and incongruity is literally weeks after Tanner Springs Park was dedicated in the Pearl District, which is one of our densest neighborhoods in the region. I was driving north on Northwest 10th and a blur came across my windshield, and I stopped immediately and got out, and sure enough an osprey had dived into this incredibly shallow pond at Tanner Springs. And the folks who designed it intended to initially to daylight that stream. They weren't able to do that, so they created a faux wetland in a little open pond, and a local resident had been dropping koi into this pond, and the osprey figured that out pretty quickly. And not only do osprey hang out at Tanner Springs, but there's a great blue heron who's been hanging out for the last several months, again catching those little koi. And you know, it's an incredible, as I was saying, a juxtaposition of those condominiums in that one square block area in Northwest Portland where you can see osprey and heron up close. That's amazing.
Can I ask you a question about the difference between what a park is and a refuge? Because a lot of people don't really understand the difference. Like, I know that you had worked really hard here to turn it into a refuge. And why is there a difference?
The difference between a park, in most people's minds at any rate, certainly in mine, is a park is really a more groomed, more artificial setting, and a refuge is a rougher, more natural setting.
How is a refuge a little bit more like a sanctuary?
So in what regard is a refuge a sanctuary? I consider Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, which by the way is the first formal, officially designated urban wildlife refuge in the city of Portland system. It's a refuge both for the critters and for people. It provides people with an opportunity to have for living in the city, a relatively rare opportunity to just sit and contemplate nature. And of course the refuge is also a sanctuary for the fish and wildlife that occupy that refuge.
What was it about this area in particular that made you want to protect it? Was it because of proximity to the river or the habitats?
Well, the reason for protecting areas like Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge is that it literally sits in the middle of the city. It's the last large remaining wetland in the Portland Harbor, so it's very unique in that regard. And then obviously it provides access to nature to folks who live in the Selwood Moreland neighborhood, but you know, really it's a regionally significant natural area. And the objective is to ensure that we retain areas like this through time. I frequently get asked the question, when did I get engaged with and appreciate nature? Most people think it was when I was a kid. I had an epiphany one day. I was driving a bus full of 60 middle school students from Camp Hancock on the John Day River through the gorge back to Portland. I said, you know, this is a ridiculous dichotomy of the world, that nature's out there and then there's the city. Doesn't make any sense. And so in 1980, after having read the proceedings and then being approached, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife came to me and to Mike at Audubon Society, and they said, look, we have no interest in wildlife in the city. If we give you $5,000 from our non-game program as a grant, will you take on wildlife in the Portland metropolitan region? And I said, absolutely. So it was very serendipitous. My mind had already been kind of noodling on the notion of putting more effort into protecting nature in the city, but it wasn't anything concrete at that point until Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife handed out that $5,000 grant, and that was 1980. I took the title as urban naturalist, created the urban naturalist program at Audubon Society, and that was the transition. That's when I really started getting engaged in nature, but it was in the city, not so much as in the wilderness areas, which I loved. Getting back to the question of whether there have been changes over the years, another significant one in my mind is we were walking along the spring water on the Willamette Trail, and I was with a group of people literally underneath these birds when I heard a which is more of a raven, and I was startled. I had never seen a raven in the city ever. And I looked up, and sure enough, there are two ravens. So the ravens have actually started to move into the metropolitan region more so than they used to. I think prior to that, I'd seen one raven somewhere out on Highway 26 toward Hillsborough. That's it. And I called up Harry Niels, who keeps track of the birds for Audubon Society of Portland for the field notes. And he said, yep, they have been increasing in numbers. So, you know, you can pop along, you see some unusual things down here, which is pretty cool. I've seen some species that don't occur in Western Oregon, for example, brewer's sparrow, which I associate with the desert, high desert in Eastern Oregon. Magpies have been seen here. I saw Western kingbird in the South Meadow this past year. So there's some unusual things you can see as well as some more common stuff. So it's one thing to actually get protection on an area like Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. It's quite another to manage it through time so that the habitat values are retained. And it's actually an interesting story because, as I said, back in the mid-60s to late 60s, the city had no plans whatsoever to protect Oaks Bottom. We managed to change their minds. We managed to get it adopted as an official wildlife refuge. But the City of Portland Parks and Recreation Bureau really had no money to manage Oaks Bottom. And so it really started out being a very grassroots, neighborhood-based effort. So fortunately, over time, what used to be referred to as our Sewer Bureau, which is now the Bureau of Environmental Services, has a vegetation program, a revegetation program, where they will come in with paid professionals, with chainsaws, with all kinds of equipment to tackle that massive amount of Himalayan blackberry. If you walk the trail today and you hadn't been here for 5 or 6 years, you'd be astonished at the level of improvement of habitat at Oaks Bottom. So what started out as purely a grassroots citizen-led effort is now formally part of Portland Parks and Recreation and the city's program.
How do you feel your motto in livable cities is the preservation of the wild encapsulates the success of your work? Does wildlife make our cities more livable?
The idea behind creating a livable, lovable city is providing access to areas like Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge so that people positively want to live in the city. It doesn't even occur to them that they'd like to live somewhere else to have access to nature because they already have it from the moment they walk outside the door of their home or their workplace or their school.
And aside from individuals taking advantage of this, have the schools started programs in some of these urban, refuges?
In areas like Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, I know Wildhaven School, elementary school, works with Portland Parks and Recreation. The kids come down here, learn about nature in the city, but they also participate in some of the restoration activities. So these green spaces throughout the region are incredibly important laboratories, places for outdoor experiences for kids across the region. So why are there 100 species, more than 100 species of birds and other wildlife that occur at Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge? The main reason is there's a diversity of habitats. You've already seen the wetland area, the open pond, the wetland and so forth from the bluff on the south end of Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. Here we're on what we call now the North Meadow. It used to be called the North Fill, but we now call it the North Meadow because in fact there's been an amazing amount of restoration that has gone on here. However, before the restoration started, amazingly enough, what used to be rubble, this is all rubble from the 405 freeway that was dumped here in the late 1970s, all of the trees that you see here were not planted. they're all volunteer. They all came in of their own accord. Unfortunately, along with Himalayan blackberry and ivy and so forth, but it is pretty remarkable when you look around the North Meadow at the ephemeral wetlands that the amphibians rely on so heavily, that this all just came about after the rubble was dumped here. Fortunately, we have local philanthropists who actually purchased this area to hold it for a few years until the city could actually buy it from them in order to protect it. As I said, beginning after 1988, after the management plan was adopted, Portland Parks and Recreation, and then later the Bureau of Environmental Services undertook some very significant restoration activities here. What you see behind me used to be all ivy, just one massive mat of ivy. There's still a little blackberry and a little ivy in there, but compared to what it looked like in 1988, early 1990s, this area has been transformed pretty dramatically, both in terms of the understory under the forest, the black cottonwood and Oregon white ash forest, and on the bluff. Again, as I said, a tsunami of Himalayan blackberry and ivy. So all of that has been removed and native vegetation's replaced it. There's a wonderful little wetland feature that the city excavated to provide habitat for amphibians, which migrate off the hillside across the trail and into the wetlands. One of the things the city did, I'm not sure, it was probably Winter Haven School or one of the local schools, put little icons of salamanders and fish and so forth on the path as a subtle reminder to folks that they might want to slow down a bit, especially during that time of the season, to avoid squishing the amphibians as they're making their way to their nesting grounds.
So this is beautiful down here. Where are we? It's so different than up above on the bluff.
One of the cool things about this area is that it represents what we refer to as a refuge within a refuge. The idea being the beautiful, nicely done split rail fence that you see is intended to basically give people a very subtle signal that maybe this is an area that we don't want people to go. We have a 160-acre, downy woodpecker just called. Very cool. Now, actually, you could see that almost anywhere in the refuge. The reality is Oaks Bottom is in the city, it's in a neighborhood. There are always going to be some negative impacts on the wildlife. That's inescapable. But the reality is also that in order for areas like this to be protected, people have to come to experience and appreciate Oaks Bottom. So it's a trade-off, obviously. And I like to think of it as something of a spectrum. You've got the city-owned, publicly owned land. You've got at one end of the spectrum, Pioneer Courthouse Square, which is totally paved. There's not one scrap of habitat. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, Forest Park, Powell Butte, areas that are as natural as you're going to see in the city. And there's a continuum from one to the other. And there are some areas, in my opinion, I'd say Ross Island, for example, is a classic. Portions of Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge and some other areas along the river should be off limits to people. But the reality is most of that spectrum is going to have some level of access by the public. And I think it is important to inspire people to protect areas like this. In order to do that, I personally lead a lot of field trips exposing people to areas like Oaks Bottom, Fern Hill Wetlands, Powell Butte. And I think that is an important way to, in the long run, for the most part, protect areas like this.
And actually, if you take Audubon's, what is it, Audubon's motto? Inspiring people to love nature?
Inspiring, the Audubon Society Portland's motto is inspiring people to love and to protect nature.
So that's the essence of, You educate them, they see it, they feel it, they smell it, and they start to love it.
They do. I'm sorry, I'm looking at a spotted towhee that has its mouth full of food, and it's obviously headed to its nest somewhere to feed its young. It's pretty cool.
Now, if this was mostly infill, what we were talking about earlier, how did all of the trees and the shrubs rejuvenate? I mean, was it from maybe seeds that were here years and years ago?
The seeds get here by wind. Hear a black-capped chickadee calling right now. Birds. We have floods. 1996. I'm pretty sure this is probably inundated. So all kinds of seed sources come in, including the soil that might have been dumped here. And fortunately, most of the vegetation that you see, the black cottonwood, the Oregon white ash, is native.
I think is there a frog pond near here where the students come? You were talking about the students coming and doing some classes.
Yeah, one of the,
about education.
Yeah, one of the, if you want to call it a sacrifice area, I think that may be too harsh a term actually, an area that was set aside specifically for kids to have a great experience down here. The Portland Parks and Recreation created a shallow little pond that's intended to be a nesting area, a breeding area for the amphibians that come from the hillside and come across the North Fill. But it's also obviously an incredible resource for teaching kids about nature. So it serves a dual purpose.
This seems like a very unusual natural area for a city, and I think most cities have the same kind of problem. They want to integrate natural areas into their urban boundaries. And do you find that there's this similar work going on in other cities other than Portland, or is Portland just unique in this?
Well, we're unique in one way. You use the term boundary. We do have an urban growth boundary. What I think makes us unique is that we have tried to, and actually have succeeded in, containing urban sprawl in the Portland metropolitan region, and for that matter throughout the state. If you drive throughout the Willamette Valley, it's pretty clear demarcation from the city to that ag land and farmland and natural areas.
When you talk about making the city more livable, can you talk about your motto?
Yeah, when I started the Urban Greenspaces Institute in 1999, in addition to having the mission of integrating the natural and built environments, the motto that I selected very consciously was, in livable cities. If we don't create cities that are livable and lovable, that people gravitate to and actually want to live in, because the fact of the matter is, cities have been vilified over the years. You know, at the turn of the century, the last century, cities were not that pleasant to live in. So by creating cities that are livable and lovable, and by that I mean not just the buildings, and you can have great urban design for the buildings, you can have jobs, you can have access to all kinds of cultural amenities, but without access to nature, without access to parks, without access to the recreational trail system that we're knitting together, the city is not livable. It's that simple. So in order for people to accept the fact that ecologically and from a sustainability perspective, the only way that we can really accommodate increase in population is to do so within our urban areas, not expanding across the rural landscape. The quid pro quo for that, however, is that people need access to nature where they live, work, and play, right where they step out of their house in the morning, not getting in their car and driving up the Columbia Gorge or driving to the coast, both of which are wonderful. But on a day-to-day basis, we want people to have access to nature right where they live. In order to provide a healthy environment for people, we've got to do more to protect nature where people live. And I frankly think there is an international movement. It's not just in Portland, it's not just in Chicago or Houston. There is really an international network out there of metropolitan areas and cities that understand providing access to nature for people, but also protecting nature in the city for ecological health has become a very high priority. So citizen activism is incredibly important, crucial to protecting areas like this and creating more green spaces in the regional trail network. My advice to folks typically is find that nonprofit organization that resonates with you and volunteer. There are lots of publications around that give people references to where the hiking trails are, where the natural areas are, where the parks are. One single source to go to is the Intertwine Alliance's website, the intertwineall.org, and there's a lot of information on that website from all the local park providers. In terms of written materials, I'm quite proud of the fact that we've actually produced 2 versions of a book we call Wild in the City. But both of them are jam-packed full of information, all provided by volunteers from around the Portland metropolitan region, including Clark County, Washington. So I definitely urge folks to get a copy at PALS. Audubon Society of Portland Nature Store up on Cornell carries them as well.
Well, I just wanted to thank you so much for showing us the sanctity that comes with all things living together. I mean, it really becomes almost a holiness when you experience areas like this. You get out of yourself and you realize that life is just living. And I want to thank you for all your hard work.
Great. I clearly love what I'm doing, and the cool thing is areas like Oaks Bottom, the successes that we've had are the carrots that myself and other people working on these issues need out there in front of us to keep working to a better, more integrated city for nature and people.